Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the resumption of today's special council meeting, which began earlier today at 11:30. We'll now move into delegations, as well as the notice of motion from Councillor Singh. Before we begin delegations, I'd like to remind delegations that they have 5 minutes to make their presentation. I'd also like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it'll result in an immediate removal from the meeting: interrupting the mayor, councillor, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about the mayor, councillor, staff, or others, and hate speech or defamatory comments. One last reminder for delegations: please do not take offense if following your presentation there are no questions from council. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. We'll now move on to item number 7, which is the notice of motion. Councillor Singh, do you want to just bring forward the motion before we hear from delegations? Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, as the motion has already been circulated, it is moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Davey. Do you want me to read the motion, or?
I think maybe if you can just read the operative phrases.
Okay, all right. So as for the direction, as being pointed out by this motion from this council, it is that therefore be it resolved that Kitchener urges the region to research the broader supply issue and explore options outside of those proposed, notably to increase absolute growth targets to adjust for the current housing supply deficits to date. Therefore, be it resolved that the region be requested to work with the city staff to ensure Kitchener's fair share of growth with respect to infill and intensification, but also in determining where greenfield expansion is appropriate via efficiencies of existing or planned near-term servicing. City Kitchener Council supports consideration of higher intensification targets, and the target be set at a minimum of at least 60%. Therefore, be it resolved that any required greenfield growth be confined within the countryside line on lands not designated protected countryside. Therefore, be it resolved that the City of Kitchener urges the region of Waterloo to allow for zoning of a mix of housing types throughout all growth areas using the region's draft range of mix of housing policies. Therefore, be it resolved that the City of Kitchener urges the region of Waterloo to continue researching the broader issues affecting affordable housing supply and implement best practice policies to advance our shared goals of making housing more affordable for all residents. And therefore be it finally resolved that the City of Kitchener urges the region of Waterloo to provide for complete, sustainable, and walkable communities supported by LRT and other forms of public transit and be consistent with our climate change commitments. And then, Mr. Chair, there are additional whereas clauses to the referenced final resolution that therefore be it resolved that the City of Kitchener supports the April 11th, 2023 Minister's decision of ROPA number 6 only in relation to the lands within the countryside line, and more particularly shown as a subject area on the mapping attached hereto as attachment A. Therefore, be it further resolved that the copy of this resolution be forwarded to the Premier of Ontario, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, as well as the region of Waterloo and all area municipalities within the region of Waterloo. And Mr. Mayor, I think it would probably be appropriate, along with perhaps the wording, which all of us are familiar as is before us, and it's been circulated for public consumption as well, for the clerks to have the addendum, the map, up as well as we hear from the delegates.
Okay, we can ask the clerk to put the map up on the screen, although there will be times, I believe there are some presentations, so there'll be times when the map has to come off for the purpose of those presentations. And then to be clear, that first part that you read in terms of the clauses, those were back from City Council's position on the issue back on June 13th, 2022, And then the last part is basically the position at this point in time. Okay, thank you, Councillor Singh. Okay, we have a total of 11 delegations this evening, and we also have written submissions from Hal Yeager, Paul Lowe's, the Home Builders Association, and Von Bender. And the first delegation that we have this evening is Matthew Corey. Welcome, Mr. Corey.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm here joined by Von Bender, my client. My name is Matthew Corey. I'm with the planning firm Malone, Given Parsons, and we're working for Schlegel Urban Developments. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm going to try to keep my comments fairly brief, and Mr. Bender and I will both speak to Schlegel's ownings property. The main point we wanted to raise tonight is that in reviewing the motion and the amendment that Councillor Singh has put forward, one of the properties that Schlegel owns is recommended to be maintained within the settlement boundary. This is the one in the southwest portion of Kitchener. There is another property that is just further north. It's right in the section of the Rosenberg secondary plan, just outside of it, to the southwest of it. And that property is something that we also want to raise to your attention tonight and discuss. When you look at this property, and I don't know if the clerk has a map that we can put up, potentially either of the amendment that, the attachment to the amendment or the overhead projector that Mr. Bender had provided. It may be helpful to see it. I think it's coming up there. So if council can see, there's in the dark purples are the two properties. You can see in looking at this graphic that that property plan. It should be noted that in the Rosenberg secondary plan, Amon Drive is proposed to be continued and completed through this property. So it's required to get that infrastructure. And then, of course, it's also, in our opinion, a logical extension of the settlement boundary. This is something that we did do a full analysis on and put in comments to this council and to the region as part of their consideration. Oh, there we go. There's another graphic showing the same properties. And it's absolutely required, we think, to meet growth needs. So one of the pieces of work that we did as me as a professional planner and a land economist is we did do a land needs assessment to mirror what the region had done, and we did take an assessment of what Kitchener had to provide as part of that. We concluded in the end that Kitchener needs about 324 hectares of land to provide for the housing that is required. That land requirement is partially met by the other lands that are in the motion that are proposed to be included, but it's still not fully met. These lands are, in our opinion, in an ideal location to accommodate some of that land need and to provide for the type of housing that's required for residents, especially new residents coming to the city. It's also important to note that Schlegel is an urban developer. They do quite urban developments and absolutely are willing and able to do contemporary, more dense, complete neighborhood as an addition to this area as well. So with that, I think I will stop there, and absolutely if there's any questions of me, but if I can, I would pass it over to Mr. Bender, who can speak to some of the other elements as well. Oh, there's a question.
So you're two separate delegations?
We are, but we're kind of together.
So let's ask any questions of you, and then we can hear from Mr. Bender, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Councillor Singh, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I was going to incline to wait until Mr. Bender, so I think...
Okay,
yeah.
I'll wait then.
Okay.
There aren't any others in the queue, so thank you. You just want to sit there, and
I'll
we'll
stand
come
next-
back to you. We'll come back to you after Mr. Bender.
I'll stand next to Mr. Bender.
Okay, Mr. Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. First off, I want to apologize for inundating you with a very lengthy submission about noon today. Unfortunately, with the lateness of the notice of motion and the opportunity to present today, we scrambled to try and synthesize, if you can believe it, the work that we've been doing for many, many years here with regard to both of these parcels of land. So again, apologize for getting so much information into your inbox at a late hour, and that in part is why we're asking tonight that in the absence of a willingness to consider an amendment to the motion that's before you, that you consider deferring this matter, given the gravity of it, the significance of it, and allow for opportunity for detailed dialogue, discussion, questions from technical staff and so on to take place before making this decision and sending that letter to the province. So with that, I want to speak to the motion that really is consistent, I believe, with the motion that was passed June 13th, 2022, with the exception of the change to no longer include the and/or on lands designated protected countryside, which is really affecting that Schlegel-Mattamy parcel, which is on the top left of your screen. Just to be clear, when Matt was speaking, the lands in the bottom right corner of the screen are not the Schlegel lands. Those are the Skippa lands, which are owned by many different landowners, some of whom you're going to be hearing from tonight. The lands in the top come forward so quickly without the opportunity to provide input. We do believe that the minister's communication on November that the city was expecting itself to be in on this subject where we are, and that's why we are here. We believe that the many analysis and input that we made with economists to fully engage and be an active participant in the analysis of what was going on. And we think that those submissions are what, in fact, encouraged the province to make the decision that they did in April of 2022. Get my dates right. And we would appeal to you to consider all of that information. The reports that we submitted would fill a banker's box. And so we think that this decision should be informed by the information, the technical information, the source water protection information, the regional recharge information, the land economy analysis. All of that should be reviewed when making this decision. The Schlegel and neighboring Mattamy lands can deliver 1,200 new homes through the next 3 to 4 years, assuming that a planning and engineering approval can be achieved. And we were deep into the work of preparing a shared submission for engineering and grading and so on when the provincial reset happened. Sorry, I'm trying to move through my notes kind of quickly here. I think another thing which has happened, of course, this council is aware, you passed a municipal housing pledge in 2023. And we really submit to you that the city is going to have difficulty in meeting that housing pledge. I think it's been acknowledged you will not be meeting it in the first instance without the inclusion of both the Skippa lands, these lands, and as well there may still be challenges in meeting that housing pledge. We would submit that it takes a multi-pronged approach and sustained effort to tackle the decades-long systemic housing shortfall. And we as a community builder are prepared to be part of the solution. And in fact, we have recently engaged in undertaking our first purpose-built rental project, and we have many more purpose-built rental projects coming forward on complete community lands which we hold, including the Williamsburg Town Centre.
Mr. Bender, if I can ask you to start wrapping up, please. Okay.
I'm just going to touch on, again, another one of the priorities indicated by the minister in his November 2nd letter was to consider, the activities that are underway on lands. And I'll just rattle off a few of the investments that are already underway. The local sanitary and storm sewer is already constructed to these BSF2 and Mattamy lands. The Middle Strasbourg sewer was front-ended by ourselves, Mattamy and Ian Cook, to the tune of $15.8 million. It's built. The missing link of Amon Drive, which you can see the yellow line in the top left, is really going to be disruptive to this neighborhood if that does not get built. And that was identified in the City of Kitchener's own secondary plan, the Rosenberg secondary plan.
Mr. Bender, if I can ask you to wrap up, please.
Sure. So, for all of the reasons outlined in the lengthy letter which we submitted, we would ask that you reconsider the motion that is before you, an amendment to include these lands, which are non-protected countryside lands, the only non-protected countryside lands in this corner of the City of Kitchener. And in the absence of being prepared to make that amendment tonight, we would ask that you defer to allow for additional discussion to take place. Thank you.
Councillor Singh?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Bender, there isn't really much of an argument from the points that you've made on my part. I will reference to some of the points that you have made. So you have about 51 hectares, and just for layman's, that's about 120 acres.
I believe it's about 120 of developable, yes.
Right, and so that is developable land.
Yes.
And that includes the 1,200 new homes you're saying. Is that with including Mattamy lands, or just on your lands as well?
The 1,200 does not include Mattamy, and in fact, it depends on what the community design is. That number could be significantly higher. The concept plan we have prepared is at a density of about, I want to say 67 persons and jobs per hectare, but it's just a concept. We haven't engaged with staff yet.
The other thing is you've referenced the infrastructure that already exists at the property boundary on both sides. I'm guessing that's at the north and the east side as well.
So the Amon Drive stub is built to the lands on the south edge through the Mattamy Trillium development, which is the lower part of the land. The Amon Drive stub will be built through what was formerly known as the Stamb lands. The missing link through our lands is in your schedule to be designed in 2024 and built in 2025, 2026, City of Kitchener plans.
And most of the studies, preparation for potential development of these lands are done? You're saying you could proceed with fast expediency?
We were in discussions with staff, just high-level discussions with planning staff about coming in for a pre-consultation. We were busy working with Mattamy, who recently acquired the Stamb lands, on a shared grading plan. There's very challenging grades out there with the extracted gravel pits. In fact, it's almost a bit of a rehabilitation project, if you will, to see these lands going from a sort of barren gravel pits to thriving communities going forward. Similar, I would say, to what we did with the EB Estates development, which is immediately adjacent to the region of Waterloo's Mannheim wellfield.
Okay. I think, and you understand it, I'm sure you do, although, from the development community perspective, you feel caught off guard with the motion and the direction, perhaps, which is being outlined through the whereas clause, the therefore be resolved clauses. But if, you're not successful in having any deferral or amendment to the motion as written, I'm assuming you would continue in advocating for the development of these lands going forward as well. Correct?
We've been at this since 2004 or 5, and so I guess at some point we might get the message that we should stop banging our head against the door. I don't know what our next steps will be. I'm not sure that agricultural use or aggregate extraction is something that others are looking for in the community, but if that's what the intended use is, then I guess we'll have to reevaluate.
So the other challenge on our side is the pressure by the province, in a short timeline of 45 days of giving our opinion. And I think it's the mayors that are asked, but I think Mayor Voinovich in his effort to be collaborative, I think we want this to be a council direction as opposed to just from the mayor alone. Because that short timeline, we don't have that luxury. So and that's why I asked that your efforts would carry on and continue through advocacy. And if not, it's not to say that it can't be addressed down the road.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, but, I'd like to, if I can, it's maybe a bit of a tangent from your question, but, in 2009, when the Countryside Line and then from there the regional recharge policies were evolving, we participated with the region at that time. We, in fact, supported a strong, hard, if you will, urban edge, but not a permanent edge. At that time, City of Kitchener Development and Technical Services Committee, 2009, passed a motion saying these lands out in the southwest corner should be considered an urban reserve. Again, I just say we've been at this forever, and we're not advocating to in any way move forward with lands that don't meet all of the criteria, that are not extremely appropriate for development, that don't complete communities, and don't meet housing needs. So again, I guess I say, how long do we keep at it if we're being told no, no, no?
Well, I appreciate the facts that you laid out and your advocacy as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. You had mentioned that if we don't include these two parcels of land, we won't meet our housing target. Is that what I heard you say?
I think from my standpoint as a layperson, and maybe let Matt speak to this, but I think what we're hearing and what we have learned through the analysis that was done for us through the regional official plan process with the region is that the goals are fairly aspirational when it comes to the intensification that will continue to happen in the built-up area. The numbers that were reached in the last half dozen years, if you will, we're just getting to that 50% level in Kitchener, and that was at a time of development charge holidays around the LRT project and record low interest rates. The condo market has dropped off like a stone. Building permits are down, as your building department has recently reported. We're trying to bring forward now 9-story buildings going forward. And what we have learned as we just start to get into this general market, we're into that market with seniors building taller buildings, but not in the general market, is the numbers don't work right now with interest rates and construction prices. Where they're close to working, if you will, is when you're doing rental. And the recent initiatives are really helping to make that a little bit more viable. Thank goodness that's in our strategic plan, and that is our plan, was to always get into that rental market, the general market, and that is where we're headed. But, are you going to meet your housing targets if the intensification doesn't happen in the built-up area? And we support it 100%. But we think it takes both. We think it takes, measures and initiatives to speak to those who are chronically underhoused and so on. And does the development community, does the building community have a role to play in that? Absolutely. We don't have all the answers, all the solutions. We would really like to focus on getting to those tasks and working together with the city on that instead of, spending all of our efforts and all of this, these dollars on working to debate these lands being in or out for the long term.
Okay, so you had indicated that if we didn't include these two lands, our housing targets wouldn't be met. Those were your words. So is that a staff report? Is that a provincial report? Is that a regional report? I'm just curious.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, maybe if I can, Councillor. So when we did our land needs assessment, one of a unit is not a unit is an expression that's out there, and that's meaning quite simply that every residential unit isn't the same for a very good reason. It's very expensive and hard to put families in high-density apartments. They're not affordable to families. Very much needed. We need a lot more apartments to meet the housing targets that we have, but we also need grade-related housing supply as well. And that grade-related housing supply, especially on a property like this, is essential to meet the demographic forecasts that come out of the region's land needs assessment and some of its forecasting, as well as the work that we did. The one, I think, challenge with a lot of the region's work is the assumption that you can put many families, and much of the new growth that is coming will be younger Canadians, new Canadians that will have families. They will need family-type housing, and that has to be provided as well. So even with an intensification rate of 56, which I think is what we had assumed based on the achievable numbers we thought were reasonable, and even at 60% intensification, there's still a need for that kind of housing and that requirement. So yes, I don't think you will meet your housing needs ultimately in Kitchener without providing land of this nature for the type of housing that's required overall. You'll have a skew towards a certain type of housing, and you'll only accommodate certain types of residents, and the new families that would have come here and are proposed to come here will go somewhere else, because they will have to find the appropriate housing that they need.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you don't think we will meet our housing targets, because the first comment was full certain we're not going to meet the housing targets with these two lands not included. And so I'm just trying to ascertain if this is your belief or if this is an actual report that we could see to be brought forward.
Again, Mr. Mayor, I think that's our belief. It's certainly, I think, part of the reason I think the province originally included these lands as well. And I will reiterate what Mr. Bender said. There was thousands of pages of work put in, including on land needs assessment and appropriate housing mix on this property. And one thing I'll say, I've been going to a lot of these meetings, and I don't envy you. I mean, it's an impossible task that the province has handed you. It's not fair. But at the same time, and I do applaud you for the way you're doing this, not just having the mayor go off and speak whatever private thoughts they have, doing it transparently through a council discussion is absolutely, I think, the right way to go, and I thank you for doing it that way. In the other couple instances where I have spoken to councils on this matter, I have also reiterated and reminded them that as impossible as a task this is for you, it was a highly technical task. The official plan review was lengthy for a reason. There was a lot of deep and thoughtful consideration that had to be provided. And I know that other councils are at least willing to consider, when requests like this come, to relook at anything of this nature, especially with this level of technical support, to consider whether it's something that you, Mr. Mayor, should end up asking Minister Calandra for, especially given the fact that you don't want to overlook anything that had an extensive amount of work that should be considered. Okay. So that I hope that answers the question, Councillor Denaud. But
yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Vrbanovic, and thank you for coming in. Just want to get a little bit of more clear history, Mr. Bender. You said from 2004 till now. What was the process with our staff, in the sense, with these lands? Like the interpretation that you received, or the commitments that you received. And you were mentioned about, I guess you were saying excess. I forget what it was that you just said. You said it was, these lands are designated as non-protected. No, but you're excess inventory, or
The urban reserve. You mean the urban reserve?
Reserve. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, the urban reserve concept was something that came about around this horseshoe in 2009. I think in response to the development at that time of the protected countryside notion. I heard a former regional official speaking the other night, about the development of the regional recharge policy, and how it, was originally conceived to address lands on West Side, Waterloo, Wilmot Township area, and lands in Cambridge that I'm not familiar with, but then, it evolved. The protected countryside policy also evolved. I mean, I have, files and notes from the public circulations of that time, and you go back and look at those, and it was an evolution. I don't want to suggest policy creep, but, we didn't know exactly what it would ultimately become or be interpreted as when it was first put forward as a notion. We might have joined in the developer appeal back then had we fully understood how this policy will come back to be interpreted in the future. So I think in answer to your question as well, I mean, our dealings on this land have not really been with City of Kitchener staff. They've been with the region of Waterloo. They've been around that policy of protected countryside, regional recharge, and as well, you know, if I can give a little bit more history, you know, Schlegel was not an appellant to the 2009 regional official plan, which ultimately did not get resolved until June of 2015. Multiple hearings, trips to the appeals court, back to the OMB, and so on. We were not an appellant, so therefore we were not in the room. We were not part of the settlement until at the very end we heard about the settlement that was about to be put in place. We brought a motion for standing at the hearing because we were concerned about what was going to be happening to our lands that we had already determined at that time were appropriate and appropriate to move forward for community housing in the future. We didn't expect it back at that time. And the reason the lands are not protected countryside and the Mattamy lands are not protected countryside is because that was withdrawn by the regional, settlement at that time. Quite similar, but a little bit different than what happened with the SCIPA lands. On the SCIPA lands, the entire determination of regional recharge and protected countryside was completely deferred. On our lands, it was not deferred. They were deemed to not be protected countryside right away. On the SCIPA lands, it was deferred, and part of that deferral language says when it is confirmed whether they're regional recharge or protected countryside, the countryside line will move at that time, which is the time we're at today. You know, that really just happened here as part of the 2019 to 2022 regional official plan process. That countryside line has just shifted. And we have been submitting for years. This is really the same process that's happening here. The absolute definement of that countryside line as relates to these lands should be happening now. It should have happened at the regional official plan point. That's what we were assured by staff, regional staff, when the process started, that this is the right forum for this discussion to take place. Have you approved the two items we wanted you to know the answer to back in 2015? Do you have a do you have an aquitard? And which way is your water flowing? We've proved that in spades, and not as a result of modeling, but as the result of drilling and sampling and well development and all of those things. So sorry, I don't know if that's too much detail, but I think it's highly relevant because it speaks to how long we've been at this, at it with the region of Waterloo, thought the matter was finally addressed here with the provincial recommendation, and now here before this group, who really doesn't have the history on this, and that's why we're saying, please, if you don't accept everything that we're saying here tonight without the opportunity to scrutinize it, let's sit down and show you that because we've got all of the information.
Mr. Mayor, I know my time has run out, but I have other questions.
Can you cue back in then, please? Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Bender, for coming out tonight. Just a question: should this land be approved for you, when would you break ground to build?
That is not completely within our hands, but I will say that ourselves and Mattamy are very anxious to move it forward as quickly as we can, working in collaboration with City of Kitchener Planning and Engineering. We were about to be at the point of coming in for a pre-consultation meeting, put on the table a shared grading scheme which we have developed to improve the grades of Amon Drive that were otherwise established through an OMB hearing in 2017. So we're ready to move on the lands. The pipe is literally stubbed into the lands. And not to discredit at all the SCIPA lands, but the SCIPA lands are up there in blue on the bottom right. The pipe is up at the top of the white area, which is the Dundee North planning area. So quite frankly, these lands can move forward far faster than the SCIPA lands. We also contend that all of these lands are needed to meet housing targets, housing pledges, and to meet the reality of housing demand. So we're not arguing for our lands versus other landowners in the Skippa area. We're a landowner in the Skippa area as well. We
So-
think they each, have their merits.
Thank you. So you can't say 5 years out, 10 years out?
That we would start
Would
or
you
finish.
start? Yeah, okay, even though.
We have suggested we could start in 3 to 4 years. That's assuming, a year or two of planning and engineering approvals before we would start, a shovel in the ground.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Councillor Michaud asked one of my 2 questions. Thank you. My other question was, so you talked about hitting housing targets. Are you speaking to the housing targets as put forward by the region?
I was speaking to the housing targets as I understood them to be established by, not established, sorry, as desired by the City of Kitchener. And also targets that if you met them, you would be able to achieve provincial investment dollars for infrastructure as well. That was my reference.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it's on both levels. These lands being able to proceed in the next 10 years can be and should be considered part of meeting the city's housing pledge to the province. But it's also the overall land need requirement and the type of housing that's required from the regional assignment, as well as what Kitchener needs to do to provide its housing for its own new citizens.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So a lot of this is tied up with like the actual data that we've been going off of largely is what the region collected through their official plan. So I guess the last question I would ask is what your thoughts are really in terms of the work, in terms of the land needs assessment. Do you agree with those numbers? Just looking for some context from you guys.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again, the region had they had 3 different scenarios, as you will recall. One of them, which was the 50 and 50 scenario, was 2,200 hectares, I believe it was. There was an in-between one that was slightly lower than that, and then there was the regional option that was gone forward with. The one that went forward ultimately relied on an excessive amount of intensification, in my opinion. And we had addressed that in our own land needs assessment. We ended up concluding there was just around 950 hectares required region-wide. It wasn't the original work done by the region, and it wasn't the lower number. It was a balanced approach that still pushed the envelope on intensification and the amount of apartments that would happen, but still ensured there was the right supply of other types of housing other than high-density apartments that could accommodate residents. So I agree with parts of the region's land needs assessment, but there was definitely parts we disagreed with, and it wasn't just ourselves. There was another land economic firm, Altus, who produced a similar report, independent from us, and came up with a very similar number that was required.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have some questions, but I'll go to round 2 people first. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks, Mayor Romanovic. As Mr. Bender, as you'd mentioned, you have a projection with the lands, and so do you have somewhat of a high level of how you want to develop this property?
I'm not sure if we could see the 3rd slide if I provided something that zooms in on that. Can't recall which attachment we provided. I think it's ghosted in there, but it's hard to see from here. We definitely have a...
Can we zoom that in, perhaps, Madam Clerk? A little bit there. So you can see the road network a little bit.
Yeah, I apologize. We have highly developed conceptual plans completely linking, our lands and Matamis, showing the advancement of a green corridor, because back since the days of the Alder-Strasburg sub-watershed update in 2008 and 9, there's been a goal to establish a bit of a wildlife linkage in this area that really doesn't exist today in the farming and aggregate condition. And with the approvals of the STAM lands, there's a bit of a green edge on the southern side. We were proposing to similarly add to that on our side, and create a green linkage over to that wood lot that you can see on the left side of the top left of the lands.
Okay. I guess my next question would be with regards to, so let's say if this committee, or I guess it's a council, would decide to defer this, who would you be conversing with regards to that decision? Like, who would you be working with? Like, because I know it was with the region and now we're here, so I'm confused on who would be that we would need to for you to discuss next steps with.
I would imagine it's the senior planning staff, perhaps policy planning. I guess we're not 100% confident that we understand why these lands are proposed to be left out and the SCIPA lands advanced. We feel we have answered the information that was sought back in 2015. We've answered it in spades with respect to groundwater, regional recharge, all of those matters. There's development already taking place on regional recharge lands. Residential development is not a provincial threat to groundwater. It doesn't rank as high as a provincial risk. Agriculture ranks far higher. Walkerton was an agricultural runoff and falsified records, keeping situation. Back when these policies were being brought forward back in 2009 and the previous ROP, there was a lot of discussion about, Walkerton, but the reality is this isn't what this is about. And those are the facts that we have been, constantly interacting with regional source water protection staff regarding that. They have not disputed, our GHD, our hydrogeologists, their ultimate conclusion about which way the water is flowing and so on. What has happened is that we've heard, well, that's not the only matter we want you to resolve. The goalposts have shifted. The two considerations back in 2015, which way is the water going? The notion was the water's going straight to the Mannheim recharge area, the wells at the Mannheim Treatment Center, and also you don't have an aquitard. Well, we have an extremely thick aquitard, which is confirmed through drilling, and we know which way the water is flowing because we've monitored it from the Mannheim recharge area all the way down to the SCIPA lands and beyond. We've taken a lot of that information that was developed by the previous ownership group in the SCIPA area, which did not include us, did not include Schlegel back in 2009 to 15 and so on. And we've merged that information, the well information on the Trillium development, which is on your screen, all the way to the Mannheim Treatment Center. I think, in fact, we have contributed to the body of knowledge about aquifers and aquitards and water direction in Waterloo region. And this isn't a matter about quantity, we need to make sure our water supply is sustained. Water consumption across the region is not going up. Our population is going up exponentially, and water consumption is pretty much flat. And the other reality is lands can safely be developed that, they get clean water into the ground, and, chloride waters are moved off-site where possible. They're also diluted. So we match pre to post the infiltration that is achieved on what is highly porous, gravel pit type of lands. So, we really feel we have answered all of the technical questions. I don't even want to call them concerns, but the questions that were put to us, and we didn't have the unequivocal data-driven results, but we have achieved those by doing a tremendous amount of drilling work. Drilling work that the region of Waterloo did not undertake on these lands. The region of Waterloo reached its conclusions based on mapping, on computer modeling. I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but it's not nearly as accurate now as the data from the field.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just have one more question?
You're past your time already. Just very quickly, Councillor Arnettis.
Well, I'm just wondering if this was to get deferred, would the delegate look at these lands as an opportunity to do something different with regards to, let's say, affordable housing and net zero. That's construction.
I'm not sure if I'm able to answer that question singularly standing here tonight, but one thing I will say is we have done a lot of development work up and down the Fisher-Hallman corridor, and I would suggest that further intensification and further housing forms like you are talking about, I would suggest belong more in the areas where there is better access to transit, where the grocery stores are located, grocery stores which we are building, and so on. I think that, this is a little bit further out at the edge, and I'm not sure if it's quite as well suited to that type of intensification. Our Wollaston development at Fisher-Hallman and Huron was approved back in the day, 2007 to 2009, at 55 persons and jobs per hectare, which at the time, City of Kitchener planning staff said was the best, most comprehensive plan ever. Central Linear Park, grocery store, anchored plaza on the corner, which we're finally building right now. It's going to ultimately be closer to 75 or 80 persons and jobs per hectare by the time we're done.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovic, and thank you so much for coming in tonight. I just want to confirm that I heard this piece correctly, that the countryside line will move to include this land was a promise the region made in, I think you said 2009, to include this parcel of land when certain specifications were met. Is that correct?
So, and Mattamy would tell you the same thing. We do not have minutes of settlement from our withdrawal from the hearing, from the motion that we brought to the hearing in 2015, because we were not an appellant. So we did not achieve any minutes of settlement. But we withdrew our motion. We had done all of the work in order to, participate in a hearing. The protected countryside designation was withdrawn from our land, and we withdrew our motion. So, I would suggest we didn't do that because there was no certainty for us moving forward. The certainty we achieved was if we did the work and proved the aquitard and which way the water was going, we were going to be able to move forward. That was the commitment that we had. And, we acted in good faith. I suppose in retrospect, we should have appealed the 2009 plan. We should not have withdrawn our motion. We're not the most litigious, group out there. And we are not feeling that we've perhaps taken the best approach. So, which is why we're here tonight, I guess, advocating so forcefully to please reconsider, because I think we have been, good community builders, good stewards of lands that we have, and, and the facts speak for themselves. We would not be advocating and working so hard if we didn't have a strong case. That's not our approach, and I think maybe our past successes have proven that.
Okay, so in other words, I believe what you're saying is if that you had been acting under the assumption that this would have been added back in 2015, I think you said, or 2009, one of those.
I would submit it was more than an assumption. I would also submit that the pathway to achieving the outcome was not made clear. It was a highly pressurized environment that day at the City of Waterloo Chamber, and then we were called into the ante-room to try and reach a settlement before this entire 4 or 5 year negotiated process with the region and the appellant group perhaps fell apart. So, we made the best decision that we could at the time, and we worked with the information that was being provided to us in those discussions. So, the big key thing, and it's in our submission, is protected countryside and regional recharge together is meant to be a permanent line. But when you do not have the protected countryside designation, it is not. That's the simple, conclusion. and the simple, fact.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just to be absolutely clear, and Mr. Bender, on the issue of these lands, as you pointed out, this has been something that has been, raised and by this council as a corporate entity with the region, both in 2009 and in 2015, and which ultimately, and the most recent report that was dealt with in July of 2022, and continually, while this council has indicated it should be looked at, it's been stopped at the region. My question, just to be clear, the missing link that you talk about of Anand Drive, as you pointed out, is destined to be built in the next couple of years. If I understood you correctly, the existing sanitary exists from the adjoining subdivision into this one. And then from a timing perspective, subject to what staff indicated, you could start on that planning work, and we could see homes being built there, you said within 3 to 4 years?
That is what we are saying, acknowledging that, we do not, orchestrate the planning and approvals process, but we think that would be a reasonable timeline. I think the set timelines for approvals of a plan of subdivision are far shorter than that, but we're not looking to, rush this through without appropriate, discussion and dialogue and so on. We do feel there's kind of only so many ways to organize the neighborhood based on the multiple connection points we already have to make, based on the, location of the sewer, based on the, the desire to create the green linkage, all of those things. But we don't want to presuppose that planning staff don't have some better ideas than we have regarding the plan of subdivision. We fully expected. We had some discussions with some senior city planning staff about coming in to have our first informal discussion about moving forward. And we fully expected to be having a formal meeting, in December or by the new year. And then, of course, everything sort of turned upside down as a result of the October and November processes from the province.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all the questions that we have. Thank you, Mr. Bender and Mr. Corey, for coming in this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I have another meeting to go to, so don't take it amiss when I just...
We won't be offended. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Thomason, you're next. Welcome, Kevin.
Honorable Mayor, councillors, and guest. Greed. My name is Kevin Thomason. I'm Vice Chair of the Grand River Environmental Network, and I'd like to talk about the pattern of greed that I'm seeing right now across Waterloo Region. Every municipality wants it all. They want everything that they can get. Every new house, every business, every shop, every service, every new industry. There is little restraint. It is as much growth as possible, as quickly as possible. Woolwich wants tens of thousands of more people. Wilmot now wants not only the 800% boundary expansion forced by Minister Clark with no data or justification, but now hundreds of acres of more farm destruction, trashing the countryside line concept and destroying even more farms. Kitchener wants to pave over most of the southwest corner with thousands of homes, despite it being extremely sensitive primary groundwater recharge areas that we all depend on. Every municipality wants it all immediately, at any cost, apparently even when the process is already so tainted that it is the subject of numerous provincial investigations. How did our visionary, sustainable regional official plan, with its complete communities, easily accommodating all necessary future growth, with only 150 hectares of farmland loss, a plan that was so widely celebrated by thousands of citizens, community organizations, businesses, all municipalities, and mayors just 14 months ago, suddenly turned into a race to approve as much farmland destruction as possible with thousands and thousands of acres of farmland loss. We live on a finite planet. We are in a climate crisis. Every municipality has made the needed climate pledges. But now, since a November 2nd letter from Minister Calandra is suddenly pursuing the development approval for as much farmland destruction and sprawling growth as possible. Kitchener already has thousands of building lots approved. The regional official plan is a compromise. We all know that we can't get everything we want. So the region balances infrastructure, population growth, funding, watershed capacity, and a myriad of issues to come up with the best possible plan for everyone. It is realistic rather than the pipe dreams of infinite growth. And our region is unique and thriving because we've had more collaboration and done this planning better than most others. Until a distant minister at Queen's Park dangles the chance to have it all and get everything you've ever wanted without even the need for public consultation, First Nations engagement, or even the approval of your own council, despite the fact that his minister himself states that he can't even explain how these lands were selected with no data, no justification, and no public consultation. But we do know now from investigations that there's lots of consultation with some well-connected developers. While municipalities seem to want infinite growth, I'm not so sure citizens want unfettered growth. Most citizens I hear today are concerned about climate change, our ability to grow food, our planet on fire, water, and feeding ourselves affordably. While some politicians may want empires, I think most citizens rather see things stay the way they are, or simply modest growth with some new services and neighbours in their community, rather than gridlock. It is shameful to see this motion coming forward to determine so much of the future of our communities without any public engagement or consultation. There seems to be no efforts to advertise this meeting in any significant ways, to engage the media to inform the public on the scope and magnitude of the land decisions that Mayor Verbanovic could be making unilaterally, or at best with the endorsement of this council, potentially ignoring the very different land use recommendations where there had been extensive community engagement, consultation, education, and meetings, so fully understanding the regional official plan, the planning process, and numerous growth options. Voting to approve this motion is a disgrace to every citizen and community organization that participated in the 4-year-long ROP process that followed all the proper planning requirements and had a myriad of expert advice, reports, plans, and data. Woolwich Councillor Nathan Cadu said there were simply 4 letters, RCMP, as to why he was rejecting their staff report and these tainted boundary expansions. And it really is that simple. Either you're a supporter of the proper planning process, consultation, and following the current laws of Ontario, or you're endorsing and becoming party to the tainted processes of this provincial government, completely bypassing the public consultation, First Nations engagement, and planning processes required by Ontario law and becoming their scapegoats in an attempt to justify the unjustifiable. While we have no idea how Minister Clark chose these lands, we certainly don't want to get embroiled in the provincial corruption scandals. We must do better and can easily avoid this quagmire. Hence why it is so important you amend this motion to be supportive of our ROP as it was approved in August 2022 and reject these tainted forced boundary expansions. In conclusion, we shouldn't rush tonight to make irrevocable decisions we can't take back with none of the proper processes or information. We already have the common sense plan we need for now. Please ensure our regional official plan proceeds intact with no changes, as Mayor Verbanovic, most regional councillors, all area mayors, and our community so strongly approved it last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomason. We do have some questions, and then I do want to clarify a couple points.
Sure.
Councillor Davey. Oh, sorry, I didn't click you in.
Thank you for coming in. Thank you. Clearly passionate about this issue. Question: like you began the presentation with, all municipalities wanted all expensive growth. What do you think the reasoning is for that?
It's an interesting question. I wonder if some of it is the Ponzi scheme of growth, thinking that somehow we need new development to pay for things.
Okay, Mr. Thomason, I do want to caution you. You're making some comments and some accusations there that are not appropriate.
Okay, I believe it's widely acknowledged, though, that growth does not cover the cost of itself. It's about $1.30 in cost for every new dollar of revenue to municipalities, and that the idea that we need growth to succeed, as I mentioned, we live on a finite planet, we have finite resources, and people are concerned. And you mentioned my passion for things here. I think that passion is seen throughout our community. You've received hundreds of emails from citizens who are concerned, who have no other way to speak up, who this motion has only come out days ago and is a dramatic departure from the path the city was on before. So it's not just myself who's passionate. There's an entire community out there as well.
Thank you. It's certainly different from where the region was, but it is consistent with where the city's indication was prior to the regional official plan. So to follow up with another question, do you believe that there is a supply issue?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part. Do you
believe there's a housing supply issue?
Oh, yes, there's no doubt that we need more housing. I think we need to make sure that we're actually focusing on housing that can be built in the required time frame between now and 2031. And it's the housing choice and the housing that people can afford. Most of these lands that we're talking about, particularly in municipalities across the region here, won't even be coming on stream until 2045 or 2050 or later. Even here in Kitchener, you already have tens of thousands of lots and approvals already in the queue, that it's not fair that suddenly they get leapfrogged or jumped or something. There is no shortage of land, and even the provincial government's own housing task force acknowledges that land isn't the issue. What the issue is are we building the housing types that people need? Most people can't afford a $1 million single detached greenfield home. What we need are those accessory units, the missing middle, those walk-ups, those apartments. That's what the regional official plan was so focused on.
Yeah,
was building these
just,
complete 15-minute communities.
The part that I'm sort of trying to drive at is you said that there isn't a land issue. What's your belief in that there isn't a land issue?
The data shows that in any given year, only 9% of the lands that have been approved in Waterloo Region are ever developed on. That means more than 91% of the approvals that you have given are not built year after year. That's consistent going back even as far as 2006.
And you don't believe that increasing the amount of land available would help spur that supply?
No. They're not building on the thousands of lots that's already there. Giving them thousands more isn't going to solve it.
The regional official plan went to 2051. Mm-hmm. Their target in terms of the population for the region, your opinion, because you've done some research on this, is that still reasonable? Has that population gone up or down since that estimation?
Yeah, it's interesting. Population forecasting is really tricky. For a number of years I'll call it the 2010s to 2020, the region was consistently below our population growth. We were expecting about 10,000 new people a year in the region. We were only averaging 5,000 or 6,000. Then suddenly by about 2020, that switched around. And instead of now at the 10,000 we're expecting, we're now seeing 12,000 and 13,000. It's really hard to predict the future. What's driving the estimates to be a little bit low for 10 years and now to be a little bit higher now? It's hard to say. Is it the economy in Alberta, the economy in Newfoundland, the GTA, or things like that? In the end, the average has been, for about the last 20 years or so, it's about 10,000 people a year arriving in this region, which actually, if you work it out, is about a busload of people a day. It's about 50 new people coming into the region each and every day. So that's 50 cars that weren't here yesterday, or if you assume not everyone with cars, maybe 40 cars. But that's 40 more cars coming tomorrow and 40 more cars the next day. And the growth is a real challenge that we need to proactively manage and plan for, and that's something that the regional official plan and all that planning did so thoroughly, with so much discussion, so many public open houses and meetings and dialogue and expert opinion, and to suddenly bring forward a motion now, bringing on larger amounts of land than anticipated, isn't going to solve our housing crisis and isn't necessarily going to help with any of the issues we're facing.
Okay, thank you. One last question. I'm of the opinion, maybe you're not, that 50, 75 years from now, something like that, all of these lands will be brought into the urban boundary and they will be developed, okay? So the question I want to leave you with is one that I'm grappling with. What's a greater danger to the residents of our community? having an undersupply of homes like we do today and the challenges with that, or creating an oversupply and maybe advancing and I'll use a word that you'd probably use, the destruction of those lands, perhaps 25, 30 years sooner than they would have?
Yeah, great question. And the oversupply issue is a big concern, because the problem is when we designate every single acre within the countryside line, that now moves all the land speculation pressures outside the countryside line. And we're already seeing that. We just saw 3 farms purchased in Wilmot Township earlier this year on the wrong side of the countryside line by investors. We just saw another one outside Kitchener purchased about 3 weeks ago at prices that were clearly not anything farmers can afford. So by pushing that speculation out over the countryside line, that's now increasing the price of land for everyone in the region. That is now making those farms too expensive for farmers to farm anymore, even though they're in our rural townships where we're expecting it to, or supposedly expecting it to stay rural for a long time. So even though there doesn't appear to be a cost to over-designating lands, there are tremendous hidden costs that we all end up paying.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Kevin, I got to say, similar to, as Mr. Mayor has pointed out, some of the earlier comments that you made, I found it a little bit troubling as an insinuation of aspect of greed in this council giving outline on growth perspectives that our opinions may be maliciously guided, and which is far from the truth. That being said, you have also pinpointed through your comments that growth doesn't necessarily need to progress in the pace that it does, and that is ultimately, could be harmful to this community when in respect to sustainability, infrastructure, and environment. Do you commit to that? That was my understanding, the way I heard it.
Yes, and I believe you're expressing a concern that we won't have enough lands already approved or designated, and yet we have decades of land supply already designated right now. The ROP has to be reviewed by law every 5 years. We're already 1.5 years into that process. We're only 3.5 years from the next ROP review, when we will go through the full process, the full public process again, of all the meetings, land analysis, planning, population projections, everything, and that will happen again and again every 5 years. So if the lands, we already have designated now enough lands to 2040 and beyond, there will be at least 3 review periods in that time, in which if we are off on any of these estimates or projections or needs or whatever, we can make the required adjustments.
Kevin, my question to you was, my understanding the way you framed your delegation was that growth is not necessarily a good thing for this community. Did I hear that correctly?
I think some would argue right now growth is not benefiting our planet in any way.
Okay, so should we then, how do we limit growth? How do we turn people away? How do we now showcase our community as a vibrant place to live? How do we, as our families are looking for a wider housing options outside of just low-rise homes, how do we tell them that, be accustomed and content with the way you've lived? How do we say...
Our community has already done that in the regional official plan that was just approved in August 2022, that accommodated all the growth projected for us, that did it more sustainably by less farmland loss and building more of those affordable units within our existing communities where there's already brownfield and grayfield and infrastructure existing, and doing it economically and ensuring that there isn't just single-family detached greenfield homes, but that there's actually the accessory units and the housing variety and the housing choice and that focus on housing affordability. It will be far easier to meet housing targets, bringing on lands within the existing city boundaries where services and such already are, than trying to provision distant farm fields.
I don't disagree. We get delegations when we have applications for high-rise and intensification that say contrary, that there needs to be a healthy supply of low-rise housing as well, where they're feeling that it's gentrification and they're being pushed out, and they need to ensure that they can have the level of land, the housing that they're accustomed to. So let me just finish with my question first. So that being said, we're dealing with a housing scarcity right now. And I mean, I found your comments a little bit contrary. You know, we have enough supply. Yes, we're dealing with a housing supply issue. As you said, we have approvals, but they're not necessarily moving with a speed with which that we would want. That being said, we're dealing with the problems of now for housing because of past decisions where we didn't move with development fast enough or approvals fast enough. So how do we ensure that we're not carrying on the pain of a housing affordability, not just in this decade, but future decades going preceding as well?
Excellent question, Councillor Singh. And unfortunately, I think you're confusing the issue of land supply and housing supply. And our municipalities have done a fantastic job on land supply. In fact, the data shows over the last 14 or 15 years, there's been an average of 14,000 lots available every single year. There is not a shortage of land. And you've been approving it at a rate keeping up with any use of it. In fact, at times approving it even faster. So what we don't have is a shortage of land. What's happening is you've given out so many approvals that have never been acted on. And what we have is an issue where the issue isn't municipalities and land approval. The issue is, why isn't what you've approved being built? And we can all point to all kinds of properties around the city where that was approved 6 years ago for a 15-story apartment building. That was approved 20 years ago for something that was approved 35 years ago. And it still hasn't been built. It still sits as a field of gravel or whatever it is. So I think that there are many issues here, but I think we need to be careful that land supply works like a funnel. Jamming more in the top isn't going to make any more come out the bottom.
Okay, can I ask one more clarification question?
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Singh.
So I appreciate that, and please, with the respect to timing, if you can keep it answer rather short. The question is related to the SCIPA lands. I think this motion, and I think we had a delegation before you, that articulated to the very concern you're talking about. We have approvals, but people not moving forward with the actual building starts. We have a developer here who's kind of saying contrary, we have developable land outside the countryside line. Please allow us to build it. We'll get the shovels in a couple of years. That being said, that's a secondary question, or secondary argument. The other thing is right now the motion outlines including SCIPA lands, which is consistent with this council's position taken last year to the region. These lands will not be developable as articulated by one of the property, the representative from the property owner, maybe for another 10 years.
Right.
What's wrong with this planning for that 10 years out?
We have a difficult time predicting how many people are going to show up at work next month right now, just having come through the pandemic and things like that. Trying to predict things 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 and 25 years out is incredibly difficult in a rapidly changing, chaotic world. These development decisions you make are irrevocable, they're unappealable, they're permanent, and we saw with the Greenbelt scandal, the dollars being talked about are massive. 15 parcels of Greenbelt land was worth $8.3 billion. These approvals you give out here, a farm worth $3 million one day is worth $100 million the next day. We don't need these lands right now. We shouldn't be binding future generations with things that we don't know yet if we already have decades of supply. Land is not the issue. That's the one thing that so many people agree on, even the government's own housing task force, and that we need to ensure that we give the future generations the flexibility that they need and not lock open or leave open all kinds of different paths that we might regret later. It's that I mentioned earlier that we don't want to make hasty decisions now that we later regret. And there hasn't been nearly as much data on all these things that are on the motion tonight as there was in the 4 years of the ROP planning.
Thank you. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your delegation. And I wasn't going to bring this up, but you mentioned the emails we received.
Yeah.
And so this is not a question, this is more of a comment. As a person who has lobbied and been a huge advocate for many different degrees of issues, societal issues, there's got to be a better way than sending 200 emails out. The first couple I read, and then I noticed the next 198 were all the same form letters. And so if you want to, I'm just speaking for myself, if you want to call Councillor Deneau and speak to him and talk to him about the concerns, and this is anybody who's watching, I will take your calls. But having 200 emails is a bit much. You know, I actually had to go back because I'm actually waiting for I'm waiting for emails that I need to address other concerns that I missed, that I had to go back and review. And so just that's my ask. You know, if communities out there and agencies have concerns, that's fair enough. At least put them in your own words. You know, these systems now that we have, we can just hit send and it's the same form letter. To be honest with you, you lose traction that way. And that's just my own opinion. And so while I appreciate people's concerns, you lose traction if it's all the same message. So that's all I wanted to mention.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think something that's important to emphasize and stress is that's not the same person hitting send 200 times. That's 200 different constituents so concerned that they're speaking up and taking action. And I wouldn't want to underestimate how many citizens participated in the regional official plan process, who spent hours going to open houses and webinars and meetings and things like that, who then now see it potentially all overridden in a motion brought out with no public consultation or anything like that. They don't know what else they can do. The package was only posted on the city website Friday afternoon. We've only had a weekend, today's Monday, to go over it. There isn't even any media reporting on this, frankly, because half the media in the city's gone these days. Our newspapers have stopped printing, Facebook isn't running news. There, frankly, aren't many other ways for citizens to communicate these days. So I agree it's less than ideal.
I can appreciate that. All I'm asking is I wish people would put their own thoughts on paper as opposed to just a form letter. Yeah. So that's all.
I wish we had way better processes as well, too. Yeah.
I wish for $1 million, right?
Okay. Mr. Thomason, those are all the questions that we have. I will just reiterate the caution that I made earlier, and I think it's important to remember that the people around this horseshoe are here, well-intentioned, trying to make the best decisions for the future of our community. I recognize that we may have different visions in terms of how that moves forward. I think, you know, all of us, I think, or many of us in this room have the benefit of being housed and having a home in this community. And what we're trying to make sure is that other people have that same opportunity in that same home and can live and benefit from the community that each of us enjoys. And I think that's important. And so I think, you know, as you make your comments, I think it's important to reflect that. And also, to be clear, you know, while I in no way condone what is the topic of what's going on in terms of the green belt, I think it's also important to be factual, and the issues of the ROPS are not part of any investigation.
The minister just reversed the boundary expansions, these forced expansions, because he said he had no faith in the accountability of the process in which these lands were selected, and that's why he reversed the first forced boundary expansions by Clark.
Okay, so, thank you. Thank you for coming in this evening.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mr. Sean Campbell. Welcome, Mr. Campbell, and you have a presentation.
I do, and thank you so much, everybody. It's been a while since I've been here before council. Certainly the before times. I think last time I was virtual. But I want to thank everyone for inviting me in and for being so supportive of Hold the Line and the Countryside Line over the years. This photo here is from our very last festival in 2019. And Hold the Line was actually created, we think we're the first of our kind, maybe in the world, of a folk music and bicycle festival to celebrate a arcane municipal planning policy. So in 2019, we had over 300 folks, including, we were very happy to have our mayor here as well, and people who biked around the 10-kilometer St. Jacobs line, the 35-kilometer Elmira line, and a whole host of crazy people who biked the 135 kilometers around the Kitchener-Waterloo-Cambridge line. And we all came back and had great local food and music after to celebrate. And this all came about because after the 2015 challenge to the Countryside Line and the ROP, the community came together, or rather the region challenged that amendment and was successful. And it really didn't get a lot of attention in the community because it is an arcane policy hidden away in the official plan. But it means a lot to the character of our community, how we think of ourselves being a rural community with distinct rural townships, of having great farms, great food, great forests, and our drinking water, 85% coming from the ground just outside of our urban cores as well. So we start to celebrate what the region and the city are already doing with the Countryside Line and Smart Growth, to really celebrate the action that all of you and your peers at the region have been undertaking. So we're excited to have so many people come out to that. Unfortunately, our third festival was supposed to be September of 2020, and there were a few other things happening in the world at the time, so we didn't have the opportunity to move ahead with it. If the clerk wouldn't mind moving ahead to the next slide, please. And around the same time, we sent out a survey to all the local candidates across townships and cities in the region. There's a whole lot of you folks out there, and we got a lot of great answers back. You can see a few from councillors who were running at the time. For all the new councillors, I apologize. We were taking a bit of a break over the last few years, but we'll try and get to you too. And we can see the commitment that councillors express here for the Countryside Line and for smart growth development, saying that this is really central to our identity as a city, to our identity as a community, and we're thankful for that. And I think it comes through in Councillor Singh's motion here of defending the Countryside Line, that although we are thinking about other expansion, make sure we're meeting our housing target. And I'll note that everyone who's an organizer of Hold the Line is either on the board of an affordable housing organization or otherwise supports them. So this is not a NIMBY push. This is a yes and. We want to protect our Countryside Line, and we want good development within it that helps to create great housing for folks while also ensuring that we're growing in a sustainable and respectful way. And I'm really proud to see all of these statements. And again, it's come through in action as well. So I hope it will as well going forward. And if you don't mind going to that final slide, a little less exciting on this slide here, but there are a few concerns we still have. Certainly the City of Kitchener is the big voice within the region, and a lot of the smaller townships and even the other cities look to you as well. So having a strong stance here of saying, we need to work together as a community and coordinate is important, but also to ensure that we are taking that strong stance for the Countryside Line, and that could even be a slight amendment to the motion that is more assertive that, yes, this is really important for us going forward long term. We also think it's important to make sure that we're being strategic with our expansion within the existing land reserve that we have right now. I agree with Councillor Davey that likely we will get out to the end of the Countryside Line within my lifetime, but if we're strategic about how we get there, thinking really intentionally, we can make sure, or at least limit the amount of pressure on our Countryside Line to expand further beyond that. That's really important. And all of this comes down to a process that is asking you to make decisions very quickly. As we heard from our developer friends before, who are doing really important work to create new housing stock in the community that we need, they submitted thousands of documents to the region, worked with them over years, and you're being put in the really tough decision to make a choice on these lands in 10 days. The final report there at the end, Matrix Solutions, a report that was commissioned by the region, that notes that there are some significant challenges here from a groundwater perspective. It doesn't mean they can't be overcome, but it's a lot for you to have to consider within a one meeting, within a 10-day, within a 45-day period. So I'll leave it at that. Again, just to say thank you for your great support of the Countryside Line, for Councillor Singh having that within your resolution here, and also to the Mayor for making the decision to bring this before Council, something that you didn't have to do, but a good show of your commitment to this type of participatory and public engagement. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. There is a question for you, Councillor Davey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Campbell, for coming in. I appreciate it. And it's always nice to see the reminders of commitments made. And I guess my main question, and at the time that I answered that question, that's what I 100% believe. And I still believe up and not out is far more sustainable and efficient. As my record's shown, apparently I'm adding stories to towers left, right, and center. But having said that, the primary differences between 2018 and today. In about 2021, we became aware of a housing supply crisis, right? Mm-hmm. So sorry, there's a bit of a comment, but With all the available data, I 100% stand by that comment that I made. Unfortunately, the data that was made available to us, first discovered in 2021, not really peer-supported, ratified till a bit later than that, has forced us to relook at everything. And I just wanted to be honest with you back, because I know you care about the countryside line, and I think we all care about the environment, and we're caught in this unfortunate position between countryside line and the environment and finding homes for people. Anyway, sorry to comment, Mr. Mayor, but thank you, Mr. Campbell, for coming in.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor O'Dooney.
Thank you very much, Mayor Barry. Thanks for your presentation. Do appreciate it. I just want to get your thoughts, because I'm possibly the newest member here. We're growing, from what I understand from staff and the numbers that I've seen and I've read, about 5,000 a year. We're growing at a rapid pace. So since 2018, between 2018 and now, that number will have gone up significantly. As a nation, we reached out to people from different parts of the world and said, we need you. Myself included, one of those individuals that eventually decided to make Canada and ultimately Kitchener our home as well. So things have changed in 5 years, and things are changing year after year. And part of the biggest problems that we're having now is figuring out where to fit people or where to put people. So my question, I don't want to drag this into a long comment. When we go high, people tell us not in our backyard, in terms of when we build high. When we try to figure out where we place people as well, we say, don't go outside. I am not a smart person. I just want to be as honest as possible. I'm not that smart. But we're saying don't go high. We're also saying don't go wide. But we go out and we say we need people. And as a city, we're growing at 5,000. And I cannot control when a developer builds. I'm not responsible for that. And the government does not build. Developers build. So with all of these things I've thrown at you in 2 minutes, how do we manage the growth? How do we manage affordability? How do we manage finding a space for all these individuals that are coming? They're going to grow their families, you know, and they're going to be part of value-added citizens in this city as well. I'm not that smart. Would really love your thoughts on this.
I think I'd be wearing much nicer clothes if I had an answer to how to solve all of those problems. You know, these are incredibly challenging things that we're up against, and developers are in a tough spot too. You know, they are working within an environment around high inflation, high interest rates, within their own competitive pressures also. So this is not easy for anyone. I think, you know, the big challenge for us as a community and community organizations coming here is just how quickly this is being asked to change some really fundamental plans. And so if this is something that needs to happen, let's think about the process. Let's make sure that you actually have all the information that went into the official plan. If there has to be big changes, whether that's, you know, new strategies like Cambridge talking about building over top of their existing parking lots, or if we're thinking about light commercial that often has ground floor uses that are compatible with residential upstairs, but we have exclusionary zoning practices that don't allow it. You know, whatever those solutions may be, but we're making really big choices in a short amount of time. So, you know, yes, we need to keep building, and yeah, you know, it's a really hard position for the city to be approving or the region to be approving but not building, and for developers to be waiting on the city as well. It's tough for everybody. But I think the big challenge here is we're making fundamental choices that will last with us into the next generation of our community, and we're not being given enough time to do that strategically. So I think that's a big challenge for us here.
Thank you. I just want to say, last thing, Mayor, this is more of a comment, but if you don't allow it, I'll make it a commentary question. I do think it's important when we're in a challenging time like this, we all need to put our heads together. So if we're going to 5,000, from what I understand from staff, that means in the next 4 years in this city, we're expecting 20,000 people in total. That is a lot of people in the same small spot and not a lot of development happening, even though we're doing the best we can that we can improve. So I ask everyone that gets to listen to this eventually, we need to put our heads together because we have a big problem, and fighting one another and pointing fingers, not saying you did in any way, will not work, because there's still a problem that needs to be resolved, and we need to get to a higher level of conversation where we can say, how do we fix this together? But I just want to drop that in there. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Dooney. I think there was a question there. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovic and Councillor O'Dooney. I think you sound pretty smart to me. So, for being new around here, including Councillor Deneau. Thanks, Sean, for coming in. And I do appreciate your perspective that it's not an all or nothing kind of thing, and that you want to come to the table and work together, because I think there is a lot of pressure points that's involved, and again, like as Councillor Davey, I wholeheartedly believe that, and I still somewhat almost believe that too, to that day. But I have to also realize that we're also in a different world than what we were back then, like a way different. Like, I don't know, when I go around the city, I see it's a different city since the pandemic, and you don't need to be the smartest person in the room to figure that out either. But anyways, what I would like to see is, as we move forward, I would like to see somewhere where when we do have expansions, that we do, net zero and affordable housing, and that's where I think where we should go. Is that something that you would be willing to accommodate and agree with?
I think it's really important that we do have affordable housing and energy efficient buildings as we grow out. I think this goes back to that question of, is it a strategy? So do we have, and I know this is what council gets frustrated with when ideas come before council being asked for one-off approvals here and there. It's, is this actually following a budgetary strategy, a strategic plan that is moving us in the right direction, or just kind of the whims of the day? There'll always be a project that's really compelling. If we look around the outside of the countryside line, I'm sure there's some other odd parcels that maybe could be brought in, and you can make a good argument for that and maybe change it in the future, taking some other lands in so it's net neutral as the policy was intended. I think the other piece there too is there's always going to be a project that maybe has 2% or 10% or 20% affordable housing in it. What's that right amount that justifies breaching the countryside line? We start getting into a really tricky Pandora's box type situation where, without a clear strategy of saying, here's why we're growing, here's how we're growing, we're going to keep seeing pressure on that line. And once we tell people that under certain circumstances we will make an exception, unless there's guidelines around that, some restrictions, I think you're just going to keep getting those requests from folks who have that $6 million farm that could be the $100 million farm right next door. So I think, for your own sake, as well as a corporation, as a council, it's really positive to have that in a strategy, and to say, yeah, when we are growing out, that we want to make sure that there is that affordability and that sustainability element tied into it, but it's a coherent strategy that we're following.
Okay. Because I feel like eventually, as everyone is, as soon as we start building out further and further, those pressures are going to become more real. And if we're going to go that way, we might as well be building net zero. At least we're doing the best that we can. And that's kind of where the lens I'm going.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But before I ask the question quickly to Councillor O'Dooney, as Councillor Ioannidis has said, you definitely are very smart, but if you want to call yourself not very smart, I aspire to be not as smart as you. So, I really appreciate your commentary, because, you're really showcasing that there's more nuance and more context rather than saying this is the hard boundary, although you do want to advocate the preservation of agricultural land and ensuring that there is a certain boundary that protects that land, and more importantly our water recharge areas. That being said, now again from your comments, you've already, I think, have reaffirmed that your concern's not so much with this motion. In fact, you're happy with it because it does address the countryside line and any development is inside as being proposed. But one of the things that you said is we have to articulate the how and why when we start looking at lands, perhaps outside. And that discussion will be before this council, not the region. I think one of the things that we haven't really addressed the fact is that there won't be a regional official plan. It'll be a Kitchener official plan as to how development happens in the city of Kitchener. And the way development happens in our southwest corridor will be decided by this council in the coming years. Now back to the how and why. How about the when? The fact that there could be lands that are service ready for development, and perhaps one of the delegates has said they could proceed with development in 2 to 3 years. I mean, this is housing that we need and commitments that we made in our housing starts that they could help us tremendously with. How do you address that delegate?
Yeah, so I think, first off, the countryside line as it's been, I think, presented to the community is it being a hard line other than the Southwest policy area where there's some work that needs to be done to solidify that. So I think, myself and others would have a challenge if we're talking about breaches of other parts of the countryside line. I think where I look at the meeting our housing needs and the timing of that is intentionality and strategy. And I think what we're being asked for here is maybe 2 different pieces. So the first decision we have to make is, are we going to approve this growth right now? And then the other piece around longer term planning. What happens with the regional official plan, regional government amalgamation? Do we have one government making decisions, or however many we have, 8, 7, or 8? That's smarter people than me will make those choices. But I think for tonight the decision is: are we going to defend the countryside line, which your resolution does, your motion does, and then 2, how quickly do we want to get up against the border of that countryside line? Whether it's this council or another council in the future, that eventually will have those growth pressures again to say, okay, well, we have no land remaining within the countryside line. So how quickly are we running towards that end date where, we do have to start having those other conversations about whether or not there is a more permanent breach?
You're just saying that end date's not right now.
It's not based on your motion.
No, it isn't. Yeah. But I think it's important outside of my motion. I articulated my motion the way I think that there likely is consensus around this horseshoe. But that being said, we are aware of the development pressures and housing start pressures that are implied on us by the province itself, saying you don't get these number of housing starts. We don't. Great. You have to have housing proposals, but that being said, you got to get shovels in the ground. Otherwise, you're not going to get that funding either.
Right.
In which case, if you don't get that funding, it's going to be a huge budgeting issue and a pain for our constituents and taxpayers as well. So we're balancing that, and we have a developer before us saying that we can proceed with 1,200 housing starts almost immediately. So I wanted to get your context.
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned before that governments don't build, and that's the big challenge, right? And this is something you all know, you're being measured on something that you can't possibly deliver on directly. And that's a challenge. There are other municipal lands that potentially the city could actually encourage or require development to happen on a certain timeline. Those are bigger conversations beyond the scope of this conversation here today. We know what some of those are within the region. In terms of this, I think the reality is that there is land within our region, within our city, that can be developed, including lands that have already been approved. And then we also have some more creative options as well. So by having that hard line, it's actually encouraging us to build up by creating the market for developers to actually have that infill development. We've heard about developers now moving into 4 to 6 story multi-res. That wouldn't have happened even 10 years ago. So, as we're waiting, it's also giving our community more time to mature, to think about how we're using that land. Once that becomes a single-family neighborhood, it will be a single-family neighborhood, and that's okay. We need that housing mix as well. But by rushing this decision, just like rushing any land use or boundary decision, it doesn't give us the time to think strategically about what is that form our community needs to take long term. It means that we're locking ourselves in now for what comes. But these are really hard questions, and you're in a really tough spot having to make these decisions. I think for us, the key piece is that countryside line is a promise to the community that this is how we grow, and we're really thankful to see that being maintained here today. And then our second ask is, let's make sure we're being intentional about that remaining land budget we do have, recognizing that when that's gone, we're going to have a lot more hard conversations about whether or not the countryside line truly is a permanent line, or, something that is more of a illustration on a page.
Well, thanks for summing it up as exactly as it is, that we are in a tough spot. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean, for coming in this evening. So it's now 6:50. I am going to take one more delegation right now, and I know this isn't ideal for those who are still in the room, but we're then going to recess special council for a short period of time. We had a 7 p.m. scheduled budget public input session. There are 4 delegations for that item. We have 7 delegations left for this. So we will recess this briefly so that we can hear from those delegations, and then we will resume this meeting following that. So I do apologize to those who were going to have to wait a little bit, but we're just trying to find that right balance, knowing that this issue is going to take a little bit of time yet. So with that, I'm going to go to our next delegation, which is Barbara Schumacher. Welcome, Ms. Schumacher.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors.
Sorry, you're muted.
Pardon me?
Let's see if that's on our end or on your end. Can you try again? Can you say something, Ms. Schumacher?
Good evening.
Ah, perfect.
Good evening.
Yes, you're working now.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. I am representing 50 by 30 Waterloo Region. Before I speak to the motion, I will comment on public trust in government. The untenable position and unreasonable 45-day deadline, which has been forced upon mayors across Ontario, is the result of a flip-flop in decision-making by our provincial government and a disregard for democratic process and planning norms. A government's adherence to democratic principles is a necessary precondition for citizens' trust in their elected officials. Hence, many of us find that our current provincial government is in a crisis of legitimacy, in our view. This is the backdrop for your consideration of Councillor Singh's motion. In August 2022, Kitchener Council passed ROPA 6, deciding to endorse the regional plan to develop within the urban boundary to preserve the countryside line, protecting fertile farmland, water recharge areas, and wetlands. ROPA 6 was the result of years of extensive investigations, assessments, and consultations. It was significant that Indigenous leaders sent letters of support for ROPA 6. In April 2023, the province announced a boundary expansion of 2,380 hectares out to the region of Waterloo's countryside line. This decision followed the removal of 15 parcels of land from the Greenbelt. Reports by the Auditor General and the Integrity Commissioner revealed that the Greenbelt decisions were seriously flawed, unsupported by any planning rationale, influenced by conflicts of interest, and without Indigenous or public consultation. All due process, democratic and planning norms were abandoned. At this moment, the RCMP are investigating and may lay charges. If there was any doubt that these same questionable practices were applied to the urban boundary expansions, Minister Calandra, after his own review, announced that he was reversing the urban expansions because he was not convinced that these were justified. Within days of reversing the expansions, Minister Calandra invited mayors to act unilaterally to do the very thing he reversed. Essentially, you, Mayor, are being asked to act in support of decisions for which the provincial government is now under police investigation. And you are put into a pressure cooker timeline because, as the government likes to remind us, the solution to our housing crisis demands rapid response. I would argue it is the province that has caused chaos for planners, delays in municipal approval of projects, and challenges for developers and the construction industry. It's the province's legislative changes, planning interference, lack of attention to planning experts, and the government's own advisory committees which are to blame. We know market forces and private interests alone will not solve housing affordability, and they will not solve climate breakdown either. Business as usual within the construction industry will escalate our emissions and make our climate goals unattainable. The wise course of action for this council will be to hold the line and support ROPA 6. Make it a priority to establish requirements for green development standards and apply these to applications which intensify neighborhoods, building a full range of housing forms within Kitchener's boundaries. You will have an opportunity in 3.5 years during the 5-year review to expand beyond your urban boundary if necessary. Please do not allow this deadline to force a decision which makes you complicit with the province's scandal, erodes public trust, and risks conflict with neighboring municipalities. I ask Council and Mayor to send a letter to Minister Calandra, as the City of Waterloo has done, reconfirm support for ROPA 6, decline expansion to the countryside line. It is unclear to me what has changed since Kitchener Council approved ROPA 6 in August 2022. I request that members of Kitchener Council explain what new assessments, public engagement, and Indigenous consultations have prepared you to vote on Councillor Singh's motion tonight. Thank you for your kind attention and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Schumacher, for your delegation. I believe Councillor Davey has a question.
Actually, just some clarifications, if I could. Thank you, Ms. Schumacher, for making your presentation. I just wanted to be clear that the City of Kitchener actually did not approve of ROPA 6. In fact, the motion before us today is largely consistent with the advocacy that we put forward to ROPA 6 some 18 months ago or something like that. And just from a personal standpoint as well, I've had considerable concern with the land needs assessment, which I'll get into in my comments, in terms of the numbers that they used. But anyway, I just wanted to be clear on that point. We are not backtracking on anything that we had already approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Go ahead, Ms. Schumacher. I think you're muted again.
I was just wondering about the additional amendment that you put to what you had approved on the ROPA 6. And I'm sorry, my understanding was that there were 15 of the 16 councillors who approved that going forward. I'm sorry if I have it incorrect.
No problem there, and maybe I can just clarify 2 points for you. So as Councillor Davey indicated, in June of 2022, City of Kitchener Council did not approve ROPA 6, but rather provided input to the region with a number of points, and those points are actually included in Councillor Singh's motion. One of them being that any required greenfield growth be confined to within the countryside line or on lands not designated protected countryside. Specifically with respect to the debate at the region, because that directly relates to myself and my role as mayor, who also sits on regional council. I expressed a number of the concerns that City of Kitchener Council had at regional council and questions around things like the land needs assessment and so on. We were under a time deadline, as you're likely aware, at the region where it needed to be approved. That was the indication from the province. And there are many very good things, as I articulated then, in the regional official plan, and I did support it there. But I also stated at the time that there's a recognition that there are a number of items that are still areas of concern, and we knew that those were going to get likely appealed to the province, and that's exactly what happened, and that ultimately led to a provincial decision. So hopefully that provides some clarity.
Thank you.
Thank you. So those are all the questions we have. So thank you again, Ms. Schumacher, for joining us and coming in this evening. So with that, I'll take a motion to recess, and we'll come back right after. Sorry, hold on. Clerk's telling me. Yep. Thank you. To the electronic delegates who are in the meeting, while we recess, you can stay in the meeting because it's the same link as the budget public consultation. It'll give you an opportunity to see democracy in action as a number of delegates provide input into the budget process, and then we'll come back to this issue right afterwards. Thank you again to everyone. And so I will take the motion to recess this meeting. Councillor Johnson, Councillor Michaud, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor Davey, you're going to start in 5 minutes? 2 minute stretch. 5 minute stretch. Okay.